So, good evening. This is a meeting of the Montague Finance Committee, and tonight we're meeting in joint session with the Select Board and with the Capital Improvements Committee. I am going to announce that the meeting is being recorded by MCTV tonight, and I'm going to ask if anyone else is planning to record the meeting tonight.
No, ma'am.
And now what I'd like to do is to have us go around and introduce ourselves and who we're here on behalf of. So I'm Jen Audley, I'm the chair of the Montague Finance Committee.
Raymond Garrison, FinCom, CIC.
Reynolds, FinCom. Chris Monagoni, Finance Committee.
Fred Bowman, CIC and FinCom.
Rich Kuklowitz, Select Board.
Chris Botwell, Select Board.
Karen Tonelli, Director of Assessing.
Mike Nelson, Select Board.
And I'll call the Select Board meeting to order at 6:01.
Steve Ellis, Town Administrator and member of the CIC.
Josh Lively, Chairman of the CIC, and I'll call this meeting of the Capital Improvements Committee to order at 6:01.
And Richard Whitman, FinCom.
Mr. Garrison is taking the minutes for the Finance Committee tonight. And I don't know if you all are going to want to try to adopt our minutes or if you're going to
We could do that.
Sure.
We would defer to that, right?
Take that.
Sure, they'd be excellent. I guarantee you.
All right, so the first thing on our agenda for tonight is Ms. Tonelli, who's going to talk with us about settlement and notifications.
Sure. So we did work out a settlement agreement with First Light Hydro. We are in the process of getting that agreement completely signed. My board signed it last week at their meeting, and we are waiting First Light's signature. The agreement has been vetted through their attorney, so we don't anticipate any significant problems. But that being said, our counsel has asked that we do not discuss the particulars, the numbers, until it is final. So any type of general questions. Certainly I can tell you that the agreement we came to resolves all the litigation with First Light and in a manner that I think we feel was favorable to the town and acceptable to First Light.
Excuse me, when you say all,
Sure, let me be specific.
Yeah.
They first filed in FY14.
right.
And they continue to file every year contesting their assessment on 3 of their major parcels, the last time being FY19.
Okay.
So that's the year that we just finished.
And they settled all,
The
all those
agreement-
previous, encompasses all those years.
Correct, right.
Fantastic.
Right.
And extends a bit.
And extends a bit, correct. There will be a tax agreement where we agreed to hold the value for FY20 and FY21, and that tax agreement will be coming before the town meeting members at the special town meeting in October. And furthermore, we agreed to meet beyond that to at least have some discussions for FY22, that in the event that we could come to some type of agreement with our numbers by exchanging appraisals, we did agree to at least discuss before setting any rates and having any additional litigation. So the big focus was really avoiding any future litigation given the fact that this seemed to go on so long. And I think both parties were very amenable to that. So I'm hopeful, that we'll have some open dialogue with First Light in the future with respect to their assessments.
This regular conversation back and forth is in a sense, a new direction itself.
Yeah, it is. Normally, the process was every 3 years when we had what's called a reval year, the town would hire an appraiser to do this, to appraise this, what's known as a specialty property. And then the first time they would see it would often be just before the bills or when they received the bills. And in the past two revals, or for the past two appraisals for FY14 and then subsequently FY17, they saw some significant increases. We think they were warranted. They made some pretty big changes with respect to equipments and turbines and things of that nature. So obviously we felt that the assessments were appropriate, and we felt that that was somewhat sanctioned when we won the FY14 assessment. You know, they were not successful in challenging that assessment was over-assessed. So, but there were still, they had taken it to the higher court, and there was still many years of litigation that we were looking at. So that prompted Rich, Steve, and I to reach out to them without lawyers, and we just talked, and it was successful.
I think it was very productive. We had asked First Light to come and sit with us with decision makers. We had met with them before, with folks that were decision makers, but with the attorneys in the room, and it was a cordial discussion about 18 months ago, I would say, but it was more like going to a dance. We didn't really get any substantial discussion. There were a lot of what ifs and nothing, and I think this time our first meeting was, we kind of felt each other out a little bit. We sat with just two folks from Eversource, or from First Light, I'm sorry, and one is their community relations person, the other was one of their VP level folks, and they listened. And the second time we sat down, they came prepared with some good information, and we had good information, and Karen and Carolyn and folks in Town Hall really worked hard to show what our justifications. And I think, we sat and we had not easy discussions, but good discussions. And ultimately, I think avoiding litigation is beneficial to all parties. It's expensive, and it takes time. And so from the town's perspective, that meant that we had to keep money in overlay, as you know, to protect ourselves. So that's where we can't get into exact amounts, but there's going to be able to be a release from overlay that, when this is done, that will be substantial. And so I think that's part of what we wanted to just kind of get a flavor of, as these things start to happen, whether it's an issue such as this, or maybe another issue where there are some funds that are more one-time. How do we handle that, and how should we think about those? I think.
Yeah, without over-elaborating, because I think people have done a great job explaining it, on a year-to-year basis, if you think about the balance of overlay that we've had to set aside and revenue, this is a net revenue positive on the operating side, but that will be modest. It won't change the equation for us moving forward in that respect. As Rich mentioned, we are anticipating a substantial overlay release. I could refer to our financial management policies, and I would say that this would really be treated as a one-time revenue, because this is money we saved that we don't have to use potentially, acknowledging that all the ink is not on the page and dried, but one-time revenues will be used for capital improvements, addition to reserves, or is legally restricted to a specific purpose by a funding source. So, as we think about it, we may have money that we want to save or invest strategically, and so we want to prime you for that. And as Rich mentioned, there may be other instances where something like this might happen. So let's just say that, let's just say that Southworth is sold and there's a significant tax reimbursement from a new sale, and I can't tell you that kind of deal is done at this point. But if that were to happen, that might be one of those one-time infusions of resources. Likewise, we're going to have a conversation at some point this fall as we expect to see cannabis revenues coming into the town through impact fees or through sales tax revenues, which are two different streams of revenue, both of which hit our operating fund, but may have different requirements in terms of how we have to consider investing them if they're impact fees, or also just significant uncertainty as we have an emergent industry with a business that is fairly quick to get into the pond and may not have sustainable revenues. So I think there's some really good opportunity for discussion of values and approach that can be generalized even outside of the expected settlement with First Light.
Steve, were you hoping that we would begin having that discussion tonight?
Well, I mean, discusses an approach to handling reduced need for overlay and release of funds to overlay reserve. We don't have to step outside of that narrow window. That's how the agenda was written. My hope was that we would have a broader conversation, but I want to stay within what the agenda is, and I have a feeling that our core values and beliefs on some level will kind of become apparent as we talk about that.
Because I guess the way I have been thinking about it is that there's a timeline within which we need to make some recommendations to the select board and make some decisions about what we want to do if there's a release from overlay. But it's not an imminent, it's not a, like, we don't have to decide tonight.
No.
We have some time to think about it. So we're starting this discussion tonight. And I feel like the most productive thing that we can do is start to name what are the questions that we have, or what is the information that we feel we need to have in order to make an informed decision. And it's great to have everybody all together, but it's also hard that we can't actually talk about real numbers yet. So we'll have to get together again and do that another time.
I think that as far as policy is concerned, some of this overlay should be put in the stabilization. Say, things are going to be changing economically over the next few years. We don't want to run into a situation where we may have to start laying off and reducing services because we do not have money in bank. That's something we need to keep aware of. There are some major projects in town that some of this money could go for, and or whether or not we should, with some stipulation, give some more money to the regional district. I have my feelings on just giving them additional money with no strings attached. And it's a delicate situation, and I understand it because I've been there, okay? The difference between what we can do and they can do, and their rights and our rights. I understand all that. But if we're going to hand out money for education, it should be for educational purposes, and we should have some good ideas of some of the programs that we need in town in order to retain our student body.
Well, I mean, I may
Someone's gonna
be,
handle that, his hand up.
I'm sorry.
This is a small thing. The special town meeting on October 2nd may have an article on it, or maybe more than one, having to do with either the existing overlay amount, or I guess that's the main thing. Do you expect that there will be a signature from First Light that will enable us to discuss it with the special town meeting?
Oh, yes, yeah. I think we'll be seeing that signed agreement within a matter of days. But in addition, at the special town meeting, there will be that second component of the agreement, which is the tax agreement, that we will be holding the values for 2 years. The assessors really have no authority to agree to hold values in the future. Each and every year, we should be analyzing the sales and making adjustments. So we will be having town meeting address that tax agreement. But as soon as we are able, the first step would be for the assessors to determine how much they believe can be released. And that amount would go from the overlay account to overlay surplus. And then when it's in overlay surplus, the decisions can then be made to appropriate for any legal reason directly from overlay surplus, or if you choose not to, I believe Carolyn has indicated, it will go to free cash.
No,
Those funds will go to free cash.
it's an overlay surplus, does need town meeting approval to be removed.
Correct.
So that's why we
So
hope
we
to
can-
have that info by the time we need to post. The other piece to remember, I'm sorry, Chuck, the other piece to remember is that, as we mentioned, we came to an agreement, which means that the First Light had argued that they paid us more in taxes than they felt they should have paid. And we basically argued in the beginning, or when we started, that, no, this is appropriate. And so to be conservative and to follow rules, that are set forth, the assessors saved some money because of the contested piece of this. So a part of the money that's in overlay, so if you look, you can see what's in overlay. It's in our last public documents. But a piece of that money is going to go back to First Light, because we came to an agreement that, is a compromise. Exactly. So, if you would I would just caution people for saying, well, we had X in overlay and they've agreed and we're going to get all this huge amount of money released. There's a balance there, and one of the first things that I think the assessors do is review exactly what that is, and then
Right.
First Light gets, whatever it's called, brief, whatever.
Yeah, technically, when we look at the request or a decision made to reduce overlay, the assessors have to make sure that a balance that is left would satisfy any other active cases. We did receive an abatement from Eversource on their increase in value, so that's something we have to keep in mind. And actually, the IGR, what the Department of Revenue recommends, is that we also keep in mind outstanding taxes. The idea being that if that amount were to never be paid, overlay would kind of have to make up for it. Now, in reality, if Eileen were here, she'd say, well, that's pretty silly. I collect almost 95% of, and we certainly have the ability to collect through the lien process. We can then ultimately sell someone's property if they don't pay taxes. But that is what the DOR, they want you to take a very conservative look at releasing those funds, or I should say making sure that you do have those funds available for any future judgments as well as any outstanding receivables.
That's really good information. I like hearing that. And I also thought I heard two of us say that this deal is not signed yet, so I'm feeling like this is, like how can and we can't share details. So I think it's really important to learn of this, but I'm also wondering how we can, at this meeting, help you as the Finance Committee.
So I think we just wanted to make you aware and to have some beginning general discussions that there will be most likely some significant funds being released from overlay, because since 2014 we had been setting aside some significant funds. So I think it's realistic to say that the assessors will be releasing it, and then whatever decisions that you feel is best used for that, as Steve said, one-time revenue.
And I'm not sure the impact, if any, on the schools. This is much different than, say, the lease for land at the solar. This was, kind of a part when we took the certain amount of money through the agreement we've had with the district for kind of the affordable assessment. This was kind of the tax side of the equation. So, don't want to speak out of turn, but I'm not sure that there's like an obligation on our part. Whereas with the funds that come in from the solar lease, we felt like in the spirit of the agreement that we had made with the school district, that a portion of that were funds that that made sense to fund, to go toward the education.
Right, normal repeating revenues.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not sure I entirely agree. The amount that's been set aside for abatements and so forth comes out of the tax levy, which then gets divided between the town and the school district. So I think if we get a one-time, even if it's only one-time return, we ought to consider sharing the return, at least some kind of way.
I think it's, we can share with the education, with the district. But what I'm getting at, considering some of the changes and some of the stuff you read about the school, that, and I'm not against giving the school more money, but I want to see improvement. I don't want to see our MCAT stats going down. I want to see improvement at that institution, or we give them anything.
Yeah, so, my thought is, I think there was a lot of understanding when we were talking about the Kearsarge solar revenues, which are repeating revenues but have a finite endpoint, 25-year lease, that the school saw it as appropriate to utilize some of that for educational programming, general operating budget, but also accepted the wisdom, I think very readily, of having some of that money go into a Gil Montague Schools capital project fund. So,
What? I couldn't hear you.
into
It's
their,
well, it's their stabilization.
into their own stabilization fund.
It's not defined as a capital.
You're right,
stabilization.
you're right, it's absolutely not. And so, they have the discretion to utilize that. But, in this past year, the indications to me were that, they were certainly interested in using that for those types of projects. I think that once we have real numbers to work with, we can have a conversation with district leadership and/or with the school committee and talk about, a fairly significant backlog of capital needs, including at the elementary schools that, might serve as an excellent set of investments, because the functioning of these buildings affects the educational environment in the buildings. And so I'm very optimistic that they understand what one-time revenues are, and that we'll be able to have a productive conversation. I believe Carolyn Olson had also articulated in a letter that she shared with us that we've actually made some overpayments relative to the affordable assessment, and whether there might be some consideration of equalizing those past overpayments with, in this process, with some forgiveness relative to this set of funds relative to that is something that we could potentially have a conversation about.
So I'm happy to report that we have already started to schedule time to talk about the affordable assessment in the future, and the first part of that is going to be on September 25th. So I'll sort of set that part of the topic aside. We've come to the end of the time that we put aside for this topic tonight. Jeff, and is it Max?
Yes.
I need to ask if you are recording.
No.
I forgot to.
What are you asking?
Are you recording the meeting, Jeff? Okay.
No, I'm
Does
writing it down.
anybody have questions or final things that they want to say tonight before we move on to the next time?
Good job, Karen.
Thank you.
Jeff?
Tell me what's in the overlay now.
2.1 something million.
What I'm hearing from you is that some of that's gonna go, Rich, is that some of that will go to First Light.
Karen can answer that question, but yeah.
Yes, this is true.
And I'm hearing that some of it by some sort of formula, which I'm a little unclear on, I assume is sort of an average of abatements and exemptions plus, will stay in the overlay, because you use that for abatements and exemptions. In other words, I guess I'm saying is you have 2.1 million. You're gonna make a decision on what portion of that goes into, what is it, the
can be released from overlay to overlay surplus.
To overlay
Basically, the
surplus.
assessors are gonna determine that it's
And
no
then from
longer
overlay
needed.
surplus, somebody votes to release it totally to the town
Once
in
it-
the form of free cash?
No.
No, I just
Once
wanna get it right.
Okay, so once the assessors take action,
Yeah,
we'll release it from overlay into overlay surplus.
Yep.
That amount. That amount can then be appropriated at town meeting for any legal reason, so it can come directly out of overlay surplus at town meeting. Or, if there were to be no such action or no town meeting, at the end of the fiscal year, those funds in overlay surplus become free cash,
okay.
like June 30th.
But we have all the town meetings of this year.
Yes.
Not just the one that's coming up on October 2nd.
Because I remember, I
Yeah.
mean, I gotta say.
We could vote to appropriate it any subsequent meeting.
Oh, up until June 30th.
So-
I could say, when I was on the finance committee, there was a lot of money sitting in that overlay surplus back in 2004 or something. And I believe the state came in and said, an auditor came in and said, at some point you gotta do something with it, you can't just have it sitting there forever.
I think that was the E&D. No. Oh, I remember what you're talking about. But that was justified too, so.
Yeah, yeah.
Right. I mean, just to offer commentary, it has been essential that we maintain a buffer in the case that we might, lose at the appellate tax board. This was what would allow the town to pay any obligations and perhaps in full or mitigate any budget shocks that we might experience. So at no point has the town been carrying a larger than appropriate overlay, and in fact, we've had concerns that we might not be carrying enough over the last couple of years. So I just want to make that very, very clear that I don't know what prompted the auditors to suggest that previously, but in this instance, they would not have prompted that. That would not have prompted them to come to that conclusion, is my expectation.
An argument could have been made that we should have had more here. Had things gone, kind of totally different, we might be having a much different conversation.
And just for clarification, the Department of Revenue, every year at recap time, when we submit the overlay, did ask me for an explanation as to why we had so much money in there. So the fact that I said we had pending litigation with our largest taxpayer, the question was answered, no problem. So-
Jeff, you did hear that wasn't signed yet, right?
I did hear, and the other question, I'm sorry, I had was, is John Hamill basically correct that at least now, when you do the affordable assessment, you make the calculation, the amount that you put in the overlay gets subtracted first before you do whatever the percentage is, it used to be 48%, something in there. Is John right about that?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. And I think the old thing back in the day was index.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jeff.
You still got one more?
Sure, go for it. Looking to the future, do you or the assessors have an opinion on how the maintenance assessments number ought to change in the future?
The overlay, how much we would suggest appropriating. Certainly, I have a good idea of what we give out in terms of exemptions to veterans, so that's a pretty set number. I really don't know how many people will file abatements on any given year, but I can glean from the changes in the assessments, how many people we might, contest their assessment. And then generally, the Department of Revenue will look to see what our 5-year average was in terms of abatements that we actually did issue. And probably want us to stay within that realm unless I can explain otherwise. So,
A graceful response didn't quite answer my question. If we've been providing $250,000 up until now.
more than that, John.
No,
It's Yeah.
450.
So I have the, going back actually to 2004, where we were in the vicinity of 250, 200. Something must have happened then, because then we dropped to be roughly about 100,000 every year. And we went up to 173. So this is kind of telling me that depending on what might be pending, the assessors have sort of made decisions. And it really wasn't until 14 that we started to be in the four, and with 18 being almost 500,000. So as a percentage of our levy, certainly the last 5 or 6 years have been really significant. You know, without really looking at the numbers and doing an analysis, we may be in the vicinity of somewhere around half that,
Okay, thank you.
just to be conservative. Yep.
So the next topic on our agenda is a discussion of the fiscal year 2021 budget process and the timeline. That is a broad topic, and today we're just going to talk about 2 specific things. So we only have 10 minutes on the agenda for this. One is Mr. Lively is going to give us an update about what the Capital Improvements Committee has been discussing and decided, because at our last meeting we had a lot of questions about that, and we've met since then, so this is an opportunity for us to get an update. And then there's a question that Mr. Ellis asked us to consider that we're going to talk about.
Okay, well, I speak fast, so I'll use my 5 minutes wisely.
Okay.
First, can I give you an update of the ongoing capital projects? Would you like that? Okay, so we'll start with the DPW. I'm sure anybody's driven by there has seen that the trees are down. I'm sure Mr. Ellis can speak more to this if you'd like. The Carnegie Library entry door system. There was actually one by Renaissance, but correct me if I'm wrong, Steve, but we didn't have to procure it since it was under 10,000. There was no.
It was procured according to sound business practices. It did not have to go out to competitive bid. And we're waiting for them to start.
The Millers Falls Library structural improvement project was won by Adam Constructions for $12,000, and that is complete. The Montague Center Library has not yet been procured, but I hear that any day now. The roofs on the Shea Theater and the Town Hall Annex out there. The roof replacement at the Shea has been delayed until August 26th due to some concerns of potential interference with some productions that are going on. There's a chance that installers may have to remove a portion or all of the HVAC system ducting that's on top of the roof in order to install the new roofing system properly. So there's.
That's like next week, right?
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's Monday.
And they'll move on to the annex as soon as they finish that job.
Yeah, as soon as they're done with that, they move on to the annex. The town hall awning skirt has been removed by the DPW and brought to the metalsmith, where we await its triumphant return.
Yeah, I'm going to offer an update to that.
Okay, yeah.
New since yesterday. So there is some concern that the framing associated with that is more deteriorated than would be expected, or maybe it's exactly as expected because it's over 100 years old. But with the skirt removed, and I believe it was when the electrician was going in to do the work, they found some concerns. And so, you know, I've actually asked the DPW to look into remedies and potential projected expense for that, and so that might come back. It's never been a capital project. It was a $10,000 STM article, but we've been treating it as a capital expense in other regards.
The Gil Montague Regional School District, there were several ongoing capital projects that you're aware of. The building maintenance system upgrades at the high school, they're still being anticipated to be completed this year. That was upgrades to the components so they could control the temperature in the classrooms.
Lights, I think, too.
Individual
Was it lights?
lights
Just
to it.
temperature?
Maybe there was something added to
It,
it.
yeah, it will be more than just the
Yeah.
HVAC. I think they're taking a really thoughtful, planful approach based on our conversations with Heath Cummings.
For the pillars in front of the administrative building that are kind of rotting in place. We have one company that has responded to the RFQ. Hillcrest Security Upgrades, this is the doors and the pass-through window. Greenfield Glass has been contacted regarding the protective glass, and
I believe the
doors are on order.
The doors are on order. And I learned yesterday as well that with regard to the pillar project, that the contract was formally awarded by the school committee, and that
Great.
they're waiting for that contractor, which was Renaissance Builders, to actually finish execution of the contract and give them a start date.
For this, for the pillars,
Yes.
Yes, sir.
so it will be done by when?
No, probably not. Who knows? We'll see. Busy company.
Be nice
But it's
to-
good
be-
to have somebody
be
that's
nice
gonna
to
actually
at least
get
have
there
to see the pillars
and
up.
repair them. And the repairs to the sidewalks and curbing in front of TFHS, they're anticipated for the summer of next year, of 2020, so it should be happening too. Should we speak of the microburst issue at all, or what happened to?
There was
Yeah,
no, there was no real.
There was no real damage, so.
Small claim for the airport. Their sign was struck, and it resulted in the loss of, some computers and a circuit breaker panel, but insurance is covering it. We don't have a final cost yet, but,
But their night vision and thermal imaging cameras are all set,
yeah.
which is the important one. I think that's,
Yeah, I think the one update that I forgot to give you was the Colley Building, which had
Oh,
very
really?
significant improvements. It's at the 90% phase at this point in time. Contractor's been a little bit more deliberate than we were anticipating. We were hoping this would be done by the first week of August, but they do appear to be in good position to be done by early to mid-September, would be my expectation. And the work is coming out, I think, spectacularly well, to be honest with you.
it's been a rainy summer, so.
Yeah. There are a couple of other important capital improvements projects that might not be on your radar screen. They're much less the purview of the CIC, but the Rudders Park project is on schedule to be completed in Lake Pleasant, perhaps the most significant town-initiated public works project there in some decades. And so we're expecting that will be done and ready for final plantings as the season grows colder, as is appropriate in late September, October. I'm sorry? That's the next section.
We're gonna move on. It's a good time to transition into that. So we're anticipating potentially 2 articles for the fall special town meeting. The first being what Selectman Boutwell just mentioned, which is the roof on the field house at Unity Park, which is in end stage of, it's actively leaking, right? Just like that one was. So we expect that to, we do have an estimate.
We do.
We do have an estimate. We're not sure of how, close it is to the final price, but we do anticipate that being coming in.
And we did get some funding.
Oh, yeah, this is true.
Representative Blay was able, working with us, to secure $25,000 in the state budget to help support that capital project. So there'll be a ribbon cutting for a roof, is what I would say.
You keep hearing about earmarks, but it was the first time I read one of the documents, and it was like a laundry list just with commas, and it was like, Unity Park Fieldhouse, Turner's Falls, or something like that, 25,000, something, some other town, and there was just like a whole string of them, half a page.
I mean, I think it's tremendous that, in her freshman campaign as our state representative, that she reached out to the town, looked for a project that she might be able to endorse and bring into this, and was able to deliver it. So we're really incredibly excited by it and very pleased that we have someone who is so effective in, so early in her tenure as a representative. It's tremendous.
So that's one.
That's one. The second one has to do with the I&I study that's being conducted, that was conducted in Millers Falls. Unfortunately, we do not have the results of that study yet, but we anticipate
Soon.
It will be not just a presentation of a study, but also a recommendation for funding.
So, sure, I can jump in on this because it's not the CIC's purview to manage the study itself. The Water Pollution Control Facility contracted with, I believe it's Wright Pierce Associates, and they went through a very thorough diagnostic process, a number of levels of tests. They tested virtually the entire system, is my understanding, and they are going to prepare a report that should identify where the critical hotspots are, make recommendations for needed repairs or critical opportunities for repair, because I think that one can look at a sewer system and say, 75% of your problem is in 2 or 3 locations. I'm hoping that's what we get. And we expect to have some, at least order of magnitude, cost estimates in that. The obvious concern is that we won't know and be able to validate exactly what those improvements will cost as soon as we need to appropriate for town meeting and/or to take action this fall. It is very, very important that we do so because the nature of our agreement places us in a situation where we're going to potentially incur significant penalties for going over in the total flow that goes to the plant. I would actually take the opportunity to express my appreciation to the town of Irving that they understand the real goal here is not to generate unreasonable or excess revenue, but to get the system fixed. And so they've been good partners to this point in forgiving some of what could have been overages because we were investing that money directly in this study. And we're just very committed to, we're very anxious to get the data, to know what it might cost, and to figure out whether we can procure it this fall. We're hoping we can.
I really hope so, because they were, I think you paint a good picture that they were understanding, but they were also very clear that they feel some of the major calamities that they've had in the, I'll call it the Irving side system with backups into houses and so forth, is because of excess flow during some of the events. And so they have never asked us for anything, but there could be, they were pretty clear that, and we've found some substantial infiltration into that system is what I understand. And so we need to be as proactive as any governmental agency can be to prevent this from happening again. Because they could legitimately come after us for costs that are incurred, or their insurance company could. So we really need to be, it's very serious. And so folks in Millers who have complained that they felt they weren't getting their fair share because their waste was being pumped to Irving at a lesser rate than what Montague pays.
We're about to even
Might-
that ledger. We're about
might
to square
be-
that account.
If they were successful, they might be looking at. So anyway, I'm just trying to portray the importance of this. This is a project that rises close to the level of an emergency, in my opinion.
Agreed.
What?
Unintended prizes, water rights.
I was thinking of like industrial road issues. But yes, you're right, water does rise. And flows downhill typically.
So can you give us any further out projections beyond requests for the fall special town meeting?
Sure.
Where there's been a long-term kind of interest in how the capital improvements committee is doing on having kind of an inventory of what needs to be done and in
Sure.
what order, and then it seems like there are a lot of moving pieces in this year's budget process potentially, and capital improvements might be a big part of that.
Great.
So I don't know to what extent you all discussed that as a committee, or if we should have you come back another time, but.
Yeah, well, I mean, the town currently owns about, has no less than 15 buildings that are in active use in various, ranges of condition, from great, like at the new police station and the high school, to maybe, closer to fair, or in some cases, maybe poor condition. we're still addressing actively leaking roofs. The field house is one. The Council of Aging is getting pretty close as far as roofs are concerned. We have the ability to, it seems like, to like conduct, there's several like comprehensive building projects that could get done at any, like right now, it could be. But it seems like the town can really only afford to do that every 8 to 10 years based on just historically, right? So that leaves us with, you know, basically making strategic incremental upgrades and improvements to these buildings. We have a pretty clear system that we've developed to acquire the information needed from the department heads to help us integrate that into the capital improvements plan. So
I think too
it's
that
still in pro.
we've talked about it is that not so much for equipment, you know, for DPW, but for buildings. We'll probably come up within probably the next 6 months or before next year, it's a 5-year plan for building issues, not so much equipment issues, but more like building issues that we have to face in the next 5-10 years.
So, I mean, we've set out a calendar that would have submissions come in by October 31, or November 1st, I think it was actually, from our town department heads, and December 1st from the schools. That may be a stretch, seeing how the key departments, schools and DPW in particular, how overtaxed they are at this time of year as they're finishing seasons and getting ready for seasons. But we're hoping that they can make that schedule. We already have a sense of what their critical red projects are. We've had meetings with building maintenance staff. We've had them complete surveys for most, not quite all buildings. And so I feel like we have a good sense of things. I think one of the things that we'll bring back to our next capital improvements committee meeting is when you talk about building out a capital project plan, the question becomes when you really need to replace 3 or 4 or 5 buildings or have conversations about whether you should divest of certain buildings. You know, you can build a capital improvements plan that includes all of those buildings as if they'll never have a project or as if they will. So, you know, it's a very interesting process. Where I think we are now is like looking at Maslow's hierarchy, and shelter is like such a primary one. You know, we're really worried about roofs and HVAC systems, like these fundamental things that preserve the environment, that create a safe and functional programmatic space, and that help us to avoid significant downstream capital costs if they're not dealt with. So I feel like we have a really good understanding of what's in front of us. I think the real hard part of the project is knowing that we will not have an infusion of resources likely that would allow us to build 3 new libraries, you know, build a new council on aging, build new elementary schools, is how we plan for what we might do and how we build a realistic capital plan. Because I think that our goal as a committee, and again, we'll talk more about this in September, is how we take a practical, pragmatic approach to the work as an exercise. But we could spend as much money as we could allocate, you know, because many of our buildings are old. You know, so our job as a CIC, I think, is to make recommendations relative to which ones are most important now, and to think about that within the frame of budget resources we're likely to have on a year-to-year basis.
Yeah, I think we have heard several of us, I think our committee typically supports all of these capital improvements, whether it's during the year with emergencies or supporting them at town meeting. And it seems like that hierarchy of you know, immediate needs and strategic incremental, fixes, and then cleaning up the submission process. It sounds awesome, and all that work that's been updated and ongoing is awesome. But I don't want to forego what we might think in all of that reality and pragmatism. I don't want, if we continue to do, when do we get ahead of, what's the path to getting ahead of that so that it's not always fixing roofs, sticking our collective thumbs in the dike. So, while all of that is reality, it's also pragmatic to set out a strong goal, which may be a 10 or 15-year goal, but to prepare for that. If that goal includes visionary pieces like, and important community pieces like library and elementary school and Center on Aging, but we don't get there if we don't name those as goals and prepare for them.
Right. Right. I mean, I think others were here prior to my tenure, and they went through the process of establishing a priority of 3 specific projects, and that included the DPW building, a new DPW, a new Carnegie Library, or sort of main branch, and a new Council on Aging. That process identified the DPW as the first priority. I believe the next was the library. Tell me if I'm mistaken. Again, with projects typically having values in the several million, and one could have included the water pollution control facility, for example, on that, which would be a substantially more complex and expensive building. I don't know that we can ever be caught up to exactly where we want to be. I think what we want to do is move ourselves out of a place where we're dealing with what are predictable failures. So last year we made a choice to take care of 2 roofs, and we're almost done and realized, almost have realized those goals. And we knew that we really wanted to do the Unity Park Fieldhouse roof, but that, we had a huge capital project slate, and didn't feel we could put that forward, which is why we're doing it now, I can foreshadow that, the DPW has suggested to me that while it's not leaking, we have real concerns about the Council on Aging roof, and so you might expect to see an article for a Council on Aging roof at next year's ATM. That actually is indicative of us getting ahead, because that roof really should be done, as opposed to must be done. So I feel like the town has been generous and in a better position to make strategic investments over the last several years. We're going to start to see some of the benefit of that. But I don't think we'll ever be in a place where we can say everything's where we need it to be, just because so many of our facilities presently are quite old. And if you can only do one $10 million, just to use that number, project every 8 to 10 years, unless something changes dramatically, you'll always, if you've got 15 buildings, have something that's 40 years old or 50 years old or older. And that's just a reality.
I guess where I would look at it is, I tend to think of it as capital maintenance, which is different than capital improvement. We're just trying to maintain, and there's capital required to maintain and to stay at a even level, okay? And that's barely where we are. Capital improvement, to me, is something like a new DPW facility, a new public safety complex, okay? Those are major capital investments that the town needs to make that are very substantial impacts on the tax base. Whereas these others, we need to constantly keep doing capital maintenance to maintain our buildings. And that's been a focus, I think, of this entire select board and some of our predecessors as well. We've really pushed hard, and Michael has pushed very hard to, help get information, and we pushed hard around the Collie, for instance, because we need to maintain the buildings we have. And so to me, it's capital maintenance we're really after. And, and we need to remember that we're fixing roofs that are going to be roofs that will probably last, say 25 years, maybe longer. But we'll try to make them last 50, but, this is always our problem. But so some of the things we're spending money on now are pretty major expenses that won't need to be thought about again for, say, 15 years. If you're doing it strategically, in 15 years, an automatic pop-up should appear on whoever the town administrator's task list is that your roofs are 15 years old.
Yeah, so how do we get that?
So those are the things we need to continue to maintain, and I think,
Yeah.
but that's what's been worked on.
Right.
And so, there's a list of things we just need to keep working on.
Yeah, I
But I
mean-
guess I just don't want to confuse just kind of maintaining with it, with necessarily improving, because me, improvement means like a major marked shift in how you're doing things now. And we're just trying to maintain.
What happens is with the capital improvements, and what they show as capital improvements is the amount of these projects are above $25,000, so they are earmarked capital improvements.
Sure.
I mean, my observation is that I feel like the town has made progress on both sides of that equation, on the capital maintenance side and on the capital improvement side in the 15 years that I've been following Montague politics. I believe that we are in a better place than we were on both sides of that equation. And we have some nice new buildings, and we have some buildings that are in better condition than they were 15 years ago. So I do want you to know that that's my understanding of the situation.
Yeah, and I'll just mention, on the capital maintenance side, one of the things that I've observed, and I certainly intend to talk about with the DPW, is that, you know, we have like a $13,000 repair and maintenance budget for town hall and the libraries and the COA and the public safety. And so that means that they are constantly in scrimp mode, because that's next to nothing. When you think about the equipment budgets that we have in the discretionary fund, and I'm not anxious to create new lines of spending necessarily, but I worry that we may not have been giving our building staff the money they need on a day-to-day operational basis to really make what we expect happen.
Mr. Lively, you want the last word?
Nope.
Does anybody else want the last word? I'm gonna move this on. Okay. So the next topic under this item has to do with the town administrator's report, which he prepared for the select board and the finance committee last year, which is called the Budget Review and Revenue Projections for Fiscal Year 20. And at our last meeting, Mr. Ellis asked us, said, you know, producing this report is labor intensive, it takes a lot of time, some of it is real guesswork, particularly the parts about projected revenue, and wanted us to weigh in about whether we felt that that investment of time was appropriate each year. I think that there was some acknowledgement that some of the things now that they're written do not need to be rewritten, and so it wouldn't be as hard to create this report and update it for the next fiscal year. So I asked folks to take a look at the report that Steve gave us last year in December, and I think he just wants to hear from us whether we want him to spend his time doing something similar this year.
And to be clear, I don't mind doing it.
Yes.
I just want to make sure that anything you're paying me to do is productive.
Steve, is it okay with you if you just get kind of a straw poll from people? Or do you want us to,
Absolutely.
like, actually come to a consensus, or can we just give you our thoughts?
You share your thoughts, that would be fine,
Great.
you know? You want to see it?
So Steve,
Yeah.
most of the work you did was already done in the report. I think the only thing that would be beneficial to us is if you want to create a short narrative of any substantial changes that you see in the future budgets. You know, you see it come the upcoming budget and or future directions that you're looking at through the select board, financial management team, however you want to put it, that we should keep on our radar. 90% of what we're submitting on a year-to-year basis is already in. So we just need to kind of focus on the changes, at least for me. I wouldn't read your entire report unless I knew where the changes were. That's what I'd be
Right.
looking for. So a bunch of that would be kind of slept over.
Right.
So,
I could almost offer an executive summary at the start.
exactly. That would be fantastic, because it would be a lot easier, and if that's really all I'm looking for in the report, I would be looking for. Go ahead, Jen.
Can I just ask a follow-up? So are you saying then, as some of this content is already known and understood,
Yes.
you don't need to see it?
That's correct.
Right, so sort of change the focus, make it more on, okay.
Yeah. A budget summary should be a budget summary. These are the things that we need to keep an eye on. And the things that you want us to be aware of, not only in the upcoming budget cycle, but future things that are out there that could change the structure of town finance, I guess. Everybody okay?
I raised my hand, I guess I would, you know, if I wanted to go around the table. Or
I'm not sure if
I tend to
everybody's
look
gonna have
at.
things to say,
Yeah.
so.
I liked the reflections piece in the beginning that just talked about some stuff. I tend to like to look at tables and kind of trends and those sorts of things, so I found that I typically will look at those more than read all the words, quite frankly. And the last piece I would say, when I remember from, you know, reading this was, you know, it's like the table on local receipts. I didn't really need the verbiage, whereas I could see motor vehicle excise other, you know, those to me were valuable things. And then the last page where you did kind of some notable risks or just notes or whatever you want to call them, you had some good information in there that was worth like kind of just keeping an eye on. Those were like your, you know, kind of like, hey, heads up type page that I thought was good, and it doesn't need to be, you know, it needs to be as wordy or as few words as you feel, or just get the point across, you know.
Right.
We need to be aware of this, this, and this. So to me, it is very well put together, but I know you spent a lot of time on it. And to me, like, getting data is typically more what I'll focus on, so. That makes sense?
I agree